Is that good, Jackson? Can you?
That'll do it.
Appreciate it.
Do you all get stopped in TSA with your stands too?
No.
You get stopped every single time.
This table's like huge. Is everyone ready? You good?
Yep.
Observation 1 is for the first argument is to roll the judge to evaluate grounds of valid evidence to the list of a policymaker. Roll the judge vote for the valid of the policymaker through the lens, and that fits out the plan text. The plan text of the United States should eliminate veto powers for the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. It's just a resolution, but here's a copy. Advantage 1 is your call. First meeting is for argument is that there's no way to be able to solve any world commitments towards numerous human rights abuses or fielding in the context of Israel as a response, and Israel doesn't have international fear of response because the United States' ability to have veto power to the internet that the rest research from December seemed to indicate the United States has been able to use its veto power for Israel 43 times in the last year. Second is point to and the United States is not able to be able to chill out the discussions of condemning Israel because the international community knows the threat to the United States veto necessarily be able to have to be underneath her, and specifically true in the context of the United Nations, because the reason why Israel isn't able to be condemned now is because the United States has continuously intervened on the amount of vetoes that they've been able to have. The third is unanimous points, the United States veto, the United States veto power necessarily, the United States veto for Israel necessarily sows the seed of discord in the way the Middle Eastern politics are able to have the underneath her, that countries like Iran feel that the United Nations are just something they're able to serve as a tool for the United States interest to be underneath her. That makes negotiating power necessarily something that is limited on impossible history, and research seems to indicate that this is true as the fact the United States no longer been able to rise. In fact, the United States has never longer been able to have influence within the way the Middle East has happened, and simultaneously the way the United Nations has changed their dialogue towards Israel. The fourth thing this point is that there's no way to be able to solve human rights abuses without while veto power still include the underneath here is that decreasing the amount of bulldozing Palestine conditions because of the way that Israel is able to happen is happening in the world of status quo. That leads to three different things. The first is that Israel is going to Palestine and bulldozing the amount of civilizations that are happening. The second is that they're also allowing for the retraction of white phosphorus. White phosphorus that's really is something that's an ongoing condition too, because once it has affected the body, it has necessarily caused a grueling and ongoing thing. The third thing that Israel is doing in human rights abuses, civil unrest. This is particularly true in the context of both Iran as well as Palestine as the amount of interest should happen. That's solvency. The first arguments that are moving veto power necessarily be able to track Israel human rights abuses and underneath the plan to result in a decreasing possibility because from Israel, because they know that they can all of a sudden face sanctions being underneath her. This represents a massive change in geopolitics because current conditions, the way that they're not allowed for inscription to be able to have. The second solvency argument is that it also solves the perception that the United States is tied to only Israel interests and underneath her. This allows for reshaping international relations on the United Nations also because it means that the UN is no longer perceived as just being a member of the United States topic to be underneath here that also solves the United States and Israel condition tied together because they'll be able to have it. The third solvency argument is that Israel won't backlash the underneath here, that even if they wanted to, the United Nations would absolutely be able to have the authority to pull on a world coast of what status quo to be able to stop them from being able to have the underneath here. The United States had massive financial interest with Israel, which seemed to indicate that they would not be able to resolve this condition. The fourth solvency argument is the plan results in the restructuring way that UN power operations are able to have the underneath here plan would result in more for what a General Assembly would be able to look like to be underneath here that change the current conditions defined the way the United States is able to veto power over Israel. And that's The first argument is that human rights violations truly represents a worst form of abuses that truly leads to genocidal conditions to be able to happen. Those genocidal conditions that truly are in fact built for the rest of the round because that truly represents the worst form of dehumanization in which people are materially choosing that they must live in those conditions before without the ability to be able to separate themselves from that. The underneath there's that and dehumanization absolutely outcome first. There have been more people who died by poverty in the last 10 years than who ever have by hypothetical nuclear war, which indicates which would indicate they would not be able to die. Add to is Russia. First argument is the Russian veto power ensures that Syrian instability is necessarily inevitable and underneath there's the Russia's already blocked the United Nations for a resolution to be able to force a peace treaty from being able to happen just the past week to be underneath there's that and that veto necessarily is not the first, but rather according to historic claim in which Russia has had 10 UN has blocked 10 UN resolutions to be able to block Syrian instability or allow for a ceasefire to happen within Syria. The second unique point is that Russia increased for Assad's happening in the status quo. The underneath here is that Russia has already articulated that he'd be able to mobilize and move into the area in the world of current geopolitics to be underneath here. And Russia is able to use this. Putin in specific is able to use this as a hardliner standpoint within our country, which indicates that in current conditions Russia has the incentive. Please. The first argument is the plan is to be able to solve Russian veto power. The underneath here is that they would literally not have the access to be able to have a veto power. The underneath here is that would mean that ceasefire would be able to happen in Syria. A couple of reasons why. The first off is because when the United Nations tried to pass the last ceasefire, they had 85% people that were able to confirm it. However, Russia was able to veto it. The underneath here is that means that we would be able to decrease the Russian influence they have on status quo internals. The first argument is that without a ceasefire, without a ceasefire in the world status quo, conflict naturally becomes inevitable. The underneath here causes regional drawings from regional drawing from other actors such as ISIS or other conditions. This is necessarily true because of the way that international conditions they be able to have. The second argument is that all those different conditions have different interests, which necessarily spills over to other causes, or the underneath here specifically true in context is the divide between Syrian relations and terrorist organizations relations because the way the mobilizing of interest necessarily is able to happen. That makes conflict necessarily something that's inevitable in the world of status quo, which means we'd be able to have that. In fact, the first impact is that regional war necessarily causes conflict to happen within the Middle East. That necessarily spirals up to form a nuclear war because one, Assad has already said that he would be able to put his hands on the conditions, but secondly, because it would cause drawing from happening from other Western countries. We have two internal links for our drawing. The first is that of Germany. Angela Merkel would absolutely move into the Middle East in a world in which a conflict becomes inevitable because the one, she could spin it as a win for the way that Germany right-wingers are able to happen. But secondly, Syria and Germany have had high conflict of interest, which indicates that they would absolutely be able to have a second. That the United States and underneath here, the United States would be able to move into the area and call and draw and necessarily happen. They already have the incentive to be able to do so. But second, in the world without ceasefire and Middle Eastern instability, it means the United States be forced to move in. That ultimately results in the culmination of extinction. It only takes the exchange of two nuclear weapons to result in the culmination of the ending of the ozone layer as we know it, and the increasing acidification, therefore making biodiversity collapse. That's really something that's inevitable and resulting in extinction.
Okay, we'll take a little bit of prep beforehand.
Are you going to do Cossack or no?
We'll take a little bit of prep before
Oh, for
Cossack.
Cossack.
Wait, cool. 3:32 left. I'm going to start cross-ex now. Cool. The Syrian conflict's been happening for a long time. Why will Germany be drawn in now?
I guess we have two warrants for this. The first is that in a world where a ceasefire isn't able to happen and instability increases, Angela Merkel is able to use it as a right-wing win in her country. But secondly is because Germany and Syria are on like the highest contention that they've ever had in geopolitics. And so our argument is that
these all seem to have been true since the Syrian civil war
I mean,
started.
I definitely do
Why
not
are
think
they
it is
true
true
now?
that Germany and Syria have been a higher contention before today. That's just wrong.
Okay, why is that true, and why is today different?
I mean,
The reason that Germany is like so pissed off at Syria right now is because of the fact that like there hasn't been any ceasefire, and like Germany of course didn't like Assad to begin with, but with the increasing human rights abuses, the like lack of trying to resolve the civil war, all of that is making Angela Merkel literally put it as like on her platform as something that she's trying to resolve with Syria, and literally said that she would be willing to mobilize into Syria if there was not a resolution soon,
Sure.
because Syria is destabilizing not only the United Nations.
The Chancellor has to work through a coalition. What are the stances of Merkel's coalition partners on this issue?
I was just telling them to you that they would be willing to go in and use military action in Syria because they see Syria as being the major like impediment on cohesion for the United Nations and international coalitions at large.
Okay. You have indicated that ISIS would lead to conflict. If ISIS is massively declining now, then how is that possible?
I think that, like, two things. First is that our argument is that they would be emboldened in the world in which ceasefire doesn't happen in the Middle East. So I think that we would see a change in that record. But secondly, we're also articulating that even if ISIS is decreasing, because there would be such a conflicting of interest in the region due to all of the drawn, that it would, like this happened.
Why does their motivation matter if they originally don't have the means to succeed?
I mean, I think that like a defensive argument that says ISIS can't have weapons now is just wrong. Because I'm confused by your question.
Okay. I feel like you're making, that's fine, we'll debate that. Let's talk about the Israel advantage, right? So Israel has been condemned, so your argument is that a successful condemnation is key? Is that your argument?
Well, and like the United States not being able to veto for them.
Sure, question about what the app looks like. Do you fiat that both the US and Russia are going to agree to this?
Agree to,
Ending permanent veto powers?
I mean, we will veto that the UN no longer has permanent veto powers.
Okay, and in your world, are you going to fiat that the US and Russia support whatever resolution is passed to change that policy?
Sure.
Okay. Let's cross it.
3 off and then a
Oh, wait.
new Are you on 2?
Yeah.
Okay, alright, cool.
That's fine. 317 remaining.
Alright, 3 off and then the out. Cool. Cool. Anyone not ready?
I'm good.
Cool.
Versus disadvantage U.S. and Germany. The ace of is because the first argument, the veto power shaking United States and Germany in the status quo. Over the last 15 vetoes, U.S., UK, and France only counted for one of them. The second argument is that Russia vetoes. The U.S. Russia being able to veto the United States specifically makes the U.S. look vulnerable and weak onto the world stage because they're not able to exert their power unilaterally. The third argument is that Germany is unsustainable. The ace of is their ability to change. For example, the North 21 missile. China hasn't been able to destroy our carriers. The beats opponents are also economic constraints because the more we spend on the military, the less it's going to be able to be profitable in the future. The less that we can stand in the future. The beats opponent links the first to the UN ambassador. Vitaly Church said that veto power checks U.S. power in the status quo and eliminating what always allowed the U.S. to finally motion the Security Council and pass whatever they want. Their second argument is perception that the power of other countries to decrease the power of other countries decreases as their main voice to curb U.S. power is eliminating the status quo. The third argument is going to be spotlighting this, specifically provides a scenario by which this specifically provides a scenario by which the U.S. is able to leverage the loss of veto power, be able to pass any resolution they want in the status quo, which is always going to be Germany. However, U.S. and Germany can seize the point of the impact. The first is imperialism, verified by Iraq, because when the United States wants to increase their hegemony, they will always invade the country to lead to violence and act of violence with because of the affirmative, because the only reason that ISIS is there in the status quo is because of the overthrow of the Ba'athist government in Iraq. The second argument is immediate destruction is also independently checked, because, for example, countries like North Korea have the philosophy of Juche, which is a direct response to U.S. imperialism, which means that they always develop nuclear weapons and try to use them against each other in an irrational way. The third argument is proxy wars also become inevitable. For example, Vietnam as well as Syria, we wish to exert our hegemony in this risk conflict of the great powers such as Russia, which independently goes nuclear and leads to extinction. The further arguments also leads to economic exploitation. For example, we get economically exploit other countries. For example, South Asia in order to increase our research development of them, and we specifically have military control over them because otherwise they can get overrun by the United States.
Next is set.
UN legitimacy. The ace of one is the uniqueness of first arguments, UN legitimacy is increasing the South Dakota to veto power. The ace of one is that when Dakota veto power, it is the perception that is more representative because it allows for check of power against the power. The base of one is going to be that's also increase. The base of one is that also increases the mechanisms by which the UN is existing in the status quo, which means that they will always be able to maintain their perception. The second argument is going to be that also independently the passive Paris Accord means that UN legitimacy is probably sustainable in the status quo. The third argument is going to be that also we'd argue that veto power is specifically critical because of the way that it allows for the deliberation of bodies in order to come to a consensus. And the way unique to veto power that the basic point of the link to the first argument is going to be that this necessarily decreases United Nations power because by eliminating veto power it's going to purport that it necessarily less democratic because certain countries will always be able to pass things through large coalitions. The second argument is going to be also decreased representation for certain countries that have veto power in the status quo. For example, like Russia or China will always be able to make it seem like as if the United Nations is going against them and they will be able to rally attacks against it. One of the impacts the first is going to be Bosnia. Will also be in legitimacy with lead to more conflict in Bosnia. The ace of point of the UN peacekeepers to prevent the conflict there since the 1990s. Then lots of UN peacekeepers. The base of point is that Russia supports specifically the Bosniaks, which means that they would always be able to. That's the second impact?
No, this is like some of the internal work.
Oh, okay. Which means that Russia would always be able to step in, which ultimately escalates to nuclear war because other NATO countries would be forced to escalate against them as part of Article 5. The second argument is going to be that the UN is specifically a firewall in global conflict. And according to Mark Goldberg of Georgetown University, says that they can play a big role in global problem solving since they
Global problems require multilateral solutions.
Yeah. Global problems require multilateral responses. The UN has played a core role in post-conflict transition, supervises elections, and it's offered international legitimacy that has to
Stabilize the Balkans.
That has to stabilize the Balkans, which the internal link to this Balkan scenario. The impact is global war, which goes nuclear over the last 70 years. Conflict and military powerful states
have been less violent.
have been less violent, which means this is empirically proven.
Alright. Next is the counterplan. Ace point of the text. The United Nations should grant permanent member status and veto power for India, Brazil, and Japan, and eliminate veto power for the United States. The United Nations should grant permanent member status and veto power for India, Brazil, and Japan, and eliminate veto power for the United States.
The reason point of the competition, the first is going to be mutual exclusivity. You cannot eliminate veto power. You cannot eliminate veto power for everyone, and only eliminate for and also grant veto power for the rest. The second argument is that it competes on net benefits. The BCC's point of the solvency. The first argument solves the just that specifically we solve U.S. hegemony because the United States no longer have veto power. The second argument is going to be that also preserves UN legitimacy because it is increasing the amount of nations that are able to participate in this participate in the diplomacy of the body making. The CISA point
It also solves the...
Yeah. The third argument is that it solves the affirmative, specifically if the U.S. no longer has veto power, they would directly solve advantage one because that's the only mechanism that they have isolated. The next argument is going to be also we solve advantage two because other countries such as India as well as Japan would want to be able to curb Russian aggression. That's how which means that we probably prevent this. The decent point is that so which means that we compete on advantage. What do you want?
Oh, I'm just going to pass the
There it is.
Oh,
All right, that's sufficient. All right, on the affirmative.
On Israel, the first argument I want is the status quo. First argument I want is that they have not isolated specific solves mechanism for how what resolution would specifically be able to solve this in the status quo, which means what resolution would be able to pass after the status quo. There are no sanctions that have been proposed against Israel. The only thing that has been proposed is moving the embassy, which got vetoed. However, that is not a specific material condition that would be able to impact the way that the South Dakota violence is being impacted out in Israel and the status quo. Additionally, they say that on the link level, the first they say that sanctions are possible. However, the couple of reasons this would not happen. The first is going to be that Israel would specifically be able to rally support from other countries to be able to shut this down. The second argument they say is it solves perception. However, the United States is still tied to Israel. We still use them as a security power to check out their regional powers. They say this also means that Israel would not backlash turn. Israel would necessarily backlash because as they view this also isolated, they would be more inclined to first strike Iran. They say that the United Nations will be able to solve. However, we have articulation that the United States. However, we would say that this is not a response to the specificity of how how Israel would view its isolation just because they don't view themselves as being supported by the UN, but rather the United States specifically. Additionally, they say that the U.S. is for, additionally they say, on the impact level, they say dehumanization comes first. However, you should prefer extinction impacts. The ace point is that it is not reversible. It is not reversible. You can reverse dehumanization, but not extinction. The basic point is that the human mind has evolved to not be able to prioritize high impacts because we cannot imagine them, which means that you should prioritize them. The C point is going to be also reverses time frame because this happens first and ultimately takes it out because if you live out a life, you cannot experience dehumanization or vital life in the first place.
On add 2.
the first argument I wanted, they say that Russia blocks UN resolution status quo. However, we would argue that even if the specific instances this bad, this is specifically critical to be able to treat United States, Germany, and status quo, because otherwise the United States will always be able to impact out their imperialism across the UN. Additionally, on the link level, they say there's going to be no more veto, which causes conflicts here. However, this is because of a ceasefire. This is empirically denied. The rebels will still fight Assad in the status quo, which means that the ceasefire would never be able to be solved. That's their only solvency mechanism for the rest of the conflict. Additionally, they say this was necessarily traditional call to nuclear war. However, Bashar al-Assad is not a nuclear weapon, so I don't know how they're getting this in practice now. It's also the first argument is that they've already won the election recently, which means that they probably don't have to worry about this for the future. The second argument is that also there's a decreased incentive to lead to intervention because of the nationalist policies in Germany, which means they probably would not want to intervene. Additionally, they say the U.S. government. However, first, classify the nationalism argument, and second, there's going to be that also, additionally, Trump specifically said that he does not want to impact, specifically does not want to invade Syria, which means that there is a low amount of support for the status quo.
Russia has incentives like the naval base, which means they'll intervene regardless of the UN.
Additionally, third, we would argue that Russia has additional incentives, such as the naval base, which means that they will invade regardless of the UN. Additionally, we would argue that you should prefer impact a conflict over biodiversity collapse, because in a world where there is increased conflict, people will not care about the environment, they will be more likely to use data extraction methods, which ultimately means that this is the internal link to that.
Cool, yeah.
Okay, so first question, let's talk about the dissad. I guess, why is veto powers the linchpin for UN stability or UN power stability? Like, what's the warrant for that?
Yeah, so the articulation is that right now veto power allows for countries to feel as if the UN still has some amount of legitimacy, right? Like the P5 are specifically able to exert veto power, and that then grants the UN legitimacy because they are the largest powers.
So the veto powers are the only thing maintaining UN legitimacy now?
We argue that they're extremely critical. I mean, they're kind of inseparable.
Okay. And then I guess what's the warrant for the collapse of the UN legitimacy would happen in a world that we don't have veto powers?
Sure. Our argument is that in a world without veto powers, the UN can be seen, for example, as a proxy of the US alone.
Okay, that's just
What? We will contest the uniqueness, right?
Also, yeah, that's empirically denied because of the last, as I said, 15 vetoes, the US was just one of them.
Yeah.
So obviously that's not true.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that's why I'm confused about the link. Is the link that major powers are part of the security nationals veto powers are whether the linchpin for UN legitimacy, or is it just veto powers?
Can you repeat that?
I guess I'm just looking for a warrant. What is the specific warrant for why veto powers would kill UN legitimacy?
The warrant is that in a world where other powers do not have the ability to check back against US influence, right? That means that the UN is seen as less legitimate and not as an institution that can represent a variety of interests.
Okay, that makes sense. So in the world of the counter plan, how does that solve?
Sure. So the counterplan gives veto powers to the G4 countries,
With G3, yeah, it gives it to India, Japan, as well as Brazil. So it necessarily increases that. So it's reverse of the link. So obviously it doesn't.
Right. So India, Brazil, and Japan are the ones in the post-counterplan world who are the only ones who have veto power?
Well, there's a second point to the counterplan. You got that right.
Maybe.
It's all written there.
Yeah, it's all in the text. If that's relevant.
Yeah.
We also eliminate the veto powers for Russia, right? For the United States.
Just the United States.
For the United States. Which
Okay.
is the second point to the counterplan.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about this first, you say that Russia is being able to veto now, and that the hedge is unsustainable as a byproduct of that. I guess.
Sorry, yeah, no. The argument that unsustainability is somewhat independent is just arguing about how hegemony is unsustainable in the status quo. And then Russia checking the United States is a reason why hedge is specifically low. Sorry, but those are kind of independent somewhat.
No. That's not a problem. Counterplan on top. Hedge this, doing this, that's one edge. Hey, what do you want to hedge? The edge is Is everybody ready? On the counterplay, first argument, permutations, both that either least all the disadvantages, the words, mutually exclusive with the right entirety of the affirmative. The next argument is going to be the counterplay still, least right to the benefit because it would still result in getting rid of the United States. Veto power which necessarily kill only, increase United States hegemony as well as one would also collapse the United States, collapse human credibility because the United States would no longer be the major power, which would mean the United States Security Council would only be two small regional actors, which would collapse United States cohesion, or there's no link to the affirmative disadvantages. The next argument is going to be the advantage to serve as a terminal disadvantage because you still get rid of the United States veto power, which means that Russia becomes a major player in the Security Council. That means that there's no actor that's going to be able to help. That means that there's no actor. Russia becomes a major player, is able to literally do whatever they want to within the Security Council and veto all of the United States resolution. The next argument is going to be it doesn't solve advantage one because Japan and India are back. Israel and Japan would inevitably just do whatever the United States decided or says they want to do or says that they want. It would necessarily just mean that they continue to back India and still badge veto all of those powers, which means the veto power is not only critical to make sure that there is a ceasefire because Russia would be able to block the ceasefire, but also means that you would not be able to criticize Israel and pass these sort of sanctions on Israel because India and Japan would necessarily just block those, which means you don't solve the entirety of the affirmative and you're sailing to the advantage. The next argument is going to be the Indian disadvantage, giving India veto power. We say any sort of contestation of India for the conflict of the Pakistani vote necessarily gets blocked, which means that we don't exercise India necessarily exacerbates the Indian-Pakistan conflict because India has no sort of risk of being tested by the United Nations, which just means that they're able to go in and roll into Pakistan and not necessarily escalate the conflict in the status quo, which may result in more conflict and use nuclear weapons because Pakistan has already signaled that they have the incentive to nuclearize the status quo, which means that they don't necessarily give the advantage and cause Pakistan to freak out. The next argument is going to be also cause of Japan nuclearization because there's no risk that the United Nations will be able to fracture or stop any sort of stop them from nuclearizing, which inevitably means that they get the access to nuclear weapons again. And that causes lane pull-off, which is worse than regular pull-off because lane pull-off means that they literally pull-off overnight with raw technology that isn't able to necessarily be the same as technology, which inevitably causes nuclear conflict with China because of the South China Sea and in theory interpretation the negative is not getting counted and the results in all part of the affirmative, the negative is not getting counted and the results in all or part of the affirmative violations. They would have picked the first argument to be predictable ground internally fairness because it necessarily shows training fairness in the because you're still the entirety you're still part of the affirmative and get to include literally in the country which is impossible to predict, which necessarily kills fairness. The next argument is going to be also kills class and creates education because we're not actually debating whether or not the affirmative should or should not happen, rather whether or not a version of the affirmative would be better, which necessarily kills education, which is the only reason we want to make the edge instead. The first argument is going to be that all you need to veto power is, and the veto power literally has only been used 3 times when it's outside of the veto power, which is necessarily important, which means that the United States is not using the veto power in of itself to protect hegemony. The next argument is going to be the link turn. The link turn is that getting rid of the veto power would necessarily mean that the United States loses hegemony because Iran, Syria, North or South Korea, and China have all said that the reason that the United States is able to have such high hegemony in the status quo is because the fact that they have veto power, because the United States uses their veto power and makes the United Nations a puppet of them, which means that the affirmative is a huge link turn to the disadvantage on the impact of these first arguments is going to be the hedge self-sustainable means that all of your impacts you're an adult mind that all of your impacts are inevitable because the United States is always going to collapse on hegemony, which means that imperialism and pricing which are inevitable, or that means that your impacts are not unique because there's not going to happen because inevitably the hedge is inevitably going to collapse. You've not read a power vacuum argument, which means that if you make one of the PO, they're going to be the impact turn and the PR. The next argument is going to be the imperialism is inevitable as long as the United States has the largest military, they're always going to go into regions necessarily roll other regions, which means they get into the veto power, but necessarily not embolden them anymore in this status quo. Also, the United Nations gives them the backing to be able to run into the other regions because they're able to say, look at what we're doing for the United Nations for global peace. That's why the United States is the major funders of the peace. The next argument is going to be also proxy war.
wars are inevitable in the world. In the world of status quo, which is the only affirmative is able to resolve that, to solve the ceasefire analysis on advanced U.S. policy analysis. It says that only the affirmative is able to resolve proxy wars because proxy wars are inevitable in a country where the United States, Russia, and China are all on opposing sides about which side is taking the conflict. The next argument is going to be the also. There's a Russian turn to this argument because if you give me the veto power would only necessarily increase Russian hedge, or getting rid of veto power only increases Russia status quo, which is worse than the United States and Germany because it allows them to continue to roll into Ukraine and years to each year, which necessarily causes the European instability, which goes nuclear because there's already been 3 resolutions in the United Nations to nuclearize Ukraine and put forces upon Eastern Europe because Germany sees it as a major from which necessarily cause nuclearization collapse disadvantage. Not even the United Nations is together now. The United Nations is together now. The Security Council itself isn't together now. But the United Nations General Assembly is together now. 85% of the ceasefire necessarily supposed to be true. The first argument is going to be China, France, the United Kingdom have already said that they're not going to use the veto power anymore because it fractures the United States or fractures the United States. The argument is going to be contemplated. The unique argument for the first. This man just says it's only being used 3 times. The next argument is going to be the non-unique North Korea and Russian sanctions should already stop. This man of cohesion and self-love, and that should have been the fracturing point, the link turn. The first argument is going to be inconceivable the plan necessarily restructure the United Nations, which is the reason why, like Iran, South Korea, and China, the United Kingdom, my friends have already said that we should get rid of veto power, which means the link turn restructures the United Nations, which strengthens the United States credibility. The next argument is going to be the plan also increases the United States credibility because it's not just the public of the United States that should not said who was going to leave the United Nations, and our regulation is going to be that nobody's going to leave the United Nations because not necessarily just backlash against them with quasi-economic sanctions against them. The next argument is going to be the no collapse, even if a few independent members leave, the majority of the world still is in the United Nations that are going to be able to coalesce against that country, which means the United Nations doesn't collapse, and the Bosnian impact is inevitable. There's no reason why the United Nations collapses even would necessarily make that conflict worse, and the United Nations can be the veto power, increase the credibility to resolve that. The first argument he said we don't specify resolutions, but it's not questions, but it's resolutions about the United States is using their veto power to block any sort of resolutions because they said that they're going to veto any sort of resolution chastise Israel. The next argument he says that Israel backlash and Israel's getting rallies. The first argument is going to be literally not true. That's the entirety of the third argument says that Israel doesn't backlash because they have the United Nations pressing on them. And the next argument is going to be that they don't first strike Iran because they will literally because they're going to have any sort of backing from the United States. They would have any sort of backing from the United States and the United Nations, which means they would be chastised from it, and that would necessarily look bad on them. Also, they still would have the United States backing, which means that they're best. They have the security alliance, which means that they don't actually feel the threat to nuclear annexation comes first. When you evaluate extinction on probability and magnitude, you can see that more people have died from poverty than dehumanization than have died from a nuclear war, which means that we control the magnitude analysis and we control probability because it's happening in the status quo, which means that your time frame analysis and BS, you have to set for time frame advantage too. You say U.S. imperialism, I mentioned this on the disadvantages and the next argument he says that it's empirically not because the rebels still fight, but that's literally not true. The rebels agreed to the ceasefire that happened in the United Nations, which means just a question of getting able to have that ceasefire pass through the United States. You said ISIS doesn't have weapons, it's not about ISIS having weapons, it's about ISIS causing regional instability, increasing recruitment, which is the scenario from which you can see the next argument says that you decrease the incentive, the nationalism means that Germany and Russia are going to go in with that, and the United States isn't going to go in because of nationalism, but that's not true. Nationalism falls in line with going in with Syria because they see it as they need to go in as the regional peacekeepers. Also, that's empirically denied. Germany's already said they're going to go in, and Trump already literally said that he would go into Syria if the United States can't have any sort of resolution of the conflict, which means empirically, not only 5% of Russia involved anyway. That's literally not true. That's literally not true because they would have already gone into the region. Also, if it's resolved, there's no reason for them to go to Syria in the first place. They say the conflict turns biodiversity, but we read a conflict impact. We just say that nuclear war collapses biodiversity. It's like an impact magnifier for nuclear war. We still have the conflict advantage. There's no impact defense to this or advantage of F.
Oh wait, we have cross-X. Can you?
Oh yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
So what voters did you read for your intern on the counterplan?
Fairness in education.
Okay. Is this drop the argument or
Yeah,
no?
drop the art.
Okay. Can you explain the perm do both argument? How do you both grant veto? How do you both eliminate all veto powers for all permanent members and grant veto powers for all?
Right, well the perm argument is either the counterplan links to all the disadvantages or the permutation proves that there's no link to the disadvantages for the AF.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does the counterplan specifically link to the disad of U.S. hedge, considering that it eliminates veto power for the U.S.?
Because India and Japan would still be like the people that would just back the same resolutions that the United States would have backed in, like, in the
Why?
first place. Because they literally are like, again, puppets of the United States, or the United States.
What is
But,
the
like,
warrant for that, and where did you provide the warrant in the TTU?
right, the warrant is that Israel and Japan have both backed overwhelmingly majority of United States resolutions, and they literally only do what the United States tells them to do and vote with and allow the United States and the United Nations.
So you say that on the advantage that the rebels agreed to the ceasefire.
Right.
So like historically, when ceasefires have been initiated within Syria, have they been solvent?
Well, they've been solvent until the United Nations like no longer had the resolve for the ceasefire, and then it broke out again because of things like Russia and the United States fighting over like long-term resolutions.
But like for example, like when they agree to ceasefires, like between like independent of the great powers, like when the rebels and Assad both agree to a ceasefire, and then like literally within minutes they're back to fighting.
Right.
Like,
Well,
how
it's
is-
not within minutes. It's within like several weeks, and the reason that that fighting breaks out again is because the great powers cannot find any sort of resolution to that, and then encourage the fighting as like a proxy to be able to like resolve it.
Can you explain this Ukraine like add-on?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a term that says that Russian hedge is worse. Russian hedge is protected by the veto power because they're able to back things like the Ukraine resolutions, like for sanctions for them, like throwing into Ukraine. Allowing them to continue to have that means that the United States isn't even the veto power, that they're veto any sort of.
How does this not contradict the argument that India and Japan would just follow along with the U.S. because if that were true, then they would also.
I mean, they're on two different pages. If you want to say that those arguments contradict each other, sure, we can have that debate. Like, that means you either don't get the counterplan or you don't get this ad.
So what is the argument for how you say legitimacy is specifically low in the status quo on the dissad?
No, I say legitimacy is high.
Or sorry, legitimacy is high in the status quo?
UN legitimacy is high.
Okay, then how does that provide uniqueness for any of the link terms? Wait.
I'm confused, but.
Okay, your link terms on the dissad are that you increase United Nations credibility, am I wrong?
Correct.
Okay, so, cross next door.
Yeah.
So, starting with 317. Can you explain your link turn on the hedge dissad again?
Yeah, that the United States is using veto power to protect hegemony.
Protect hegemony.
Right.
Counterplan, hegemony disadd, UN cred disadd, add 1, add 2.
Are you just answering theory at the bottom of the counterplan?
Yeah, it's going to be very quickly. Cool. Everybody good? Cool. The counterplan not going for its conditional use if there is just a reason to drop the argument not to team best for substantive education. It's also best proportionality in order to have equitable access to collection. We don't go for it, there's no abuse. Yeah. And she said, first, we'll concede hegemony is unsustainable. There's no uniqueness for the disadd, which means you have no risk of a late turn. Second, we will concede imperialism is inevitable. Here are the implications. A point, and takes out your Israel advantage, because if imperialism is inevitable, imperialism and the context of Israel versus Palestine will inevitably occur. B point, it also means the U.S. will inevitably have hegemony in problem Israel, which means all your impacts on hegemony disadd are terminally not on the first advantage or terminally non-unique. This also takes out the Russia advantage, because in a world of inevitable U.S. inevitable V2 powers, Russia will use its hegemony in order to back up the ability of Russia will use its hegemony in order to back up Israel, which means it inevitably uses those veto powers. Additionally, this also means there is inevitably going to be Russian conflict, extending the impacting inevitable U.S. hegemony's inevitable Russian conflict. That means all your Russian conflict scenarios on advantage are terminally non-unique, which means there is no uniqueness. Now we'll answer the Ukraine add-on. 3 responses. 1 is that Russia will inevitably ignore Ukraine hegemony. It's already invaded, ignored the UN, which means that there is no uniqueness in terms of veto power. Second is they already have solidified troop forces within Ukraine and have influence there, which means that there is going to be no uniqueness, and there is no going to be the fact that even if there is going to be loss of veto, the UN will not change Russia's game in the situation. Third is Russia has nuclear forces in control over important areas within Ukraine, which means it's not going to leave suddenly in the world is occurring. Fourth is no war. Russia will back down if the EU were forced to take action, because it has disproportionately more military forces. The B point is, and all of your argument B point, the military forces. The B point is that Ukraine will not push for a resolution because the precedent of Ukraine knows that they will never lose in a conflict vis-a-vis Russia. C point is that the international powers do not care enough about this particular issue. Lastly, this one had no uniqueness in development. The last speech, so they cannot go for it. So you've already lost the debate on the UN legitimacy debate. Now let's go to UN cred. We need, as an overview, the disadd turns and outweighs the case. 3 reasons. 1, you have no specific impact defense to our scenario about Bosnia conflict. You have conceded that Bosnia is the firebreaker for global conflict. It happens fast and it draws in outside powers. And the second, you've conceded our uniqueness in the UN, according to Mark Goldberg of Georgetown University, specifically is key to solve for global conflict, because the UN is able to, UN introduces post-conflict transitions and other potentials, so it outweighs probability and scope. C point is that no specific internal link defense means that the disadd specifically outweighs and turns the case. Next is it also outweighs on probability. The UN, a global 70 years of global peace have happened because of the UN, which means that the most highly probable force in terms of resolving conflicts. So UN credibility outweighs. The next argument is it turns both advantages. 3, the A point is that in a world of weakened UN legitimacy, the UN cannot fight to reduce the power of Israel to be effective to commit violence, which means that the UN legitimacy is a prerequisite to any of your impacts. B point is it also turns the advantage about Russia, because in a world of weakened US legitimacy, they cannot work to fight against Russia, which means it definitely turns and outweighs the case. Now, which means that any risk of the disadd definitely outweighs. Now let's go to uniqueness. Cody read uniqueness the wrong way. UN legitimacy is high now, which is proven by 3 warrants you have conceded. The first is that the last 15 vetoes, only 1 has been used by the United States, which means that the UN legitimacy is restored by a veto because it's better able to be seen as independent, which means that yes, you have isolated a couple of vetoes, but the vast majority have been used against in order to create greater credibility. The B point is you have conceded a war against the Paris Accords, which happened in 2016 or 2015. That was a sign that the UN is seen as greater legitimacy. The C point is that vetoes mean they're able to be seen as more neutral, which means that all of our warrants specifically outweigh. You should also prefer our warrants for theirs. The A point is strength of link. We will have contestation of all of their warrants on uniqueness, while they have no contestation of ours. They just read counter warrants. The B point is that our warrants are more specific and recent because they cite specific events like the Paris Accords. C point is this means we control uniqueness on the debate, so our advantage comes first. Now the line by line. Your first argument is that there has already been confidence in the status quo. 85 countries are still with us. That is because of the veto, because they can be represented by outside powers that allow for greater UN legitimacy. Second is you have conceded the argument that you say you tried to cross-apply your uniqueness, but your uniqueness arguments do not apply in a world where there is still sufficient legitimacy in the status quo. C point is you have cited China and Russia, but those are not sufficient to overwhelm the fact that those vetoes are successful in this quo. Your next argument is that you and North Korea should have sunk to the UN legitimacy. No, our argument is to break specific this down because because veto powers are sufficient to keep it up. Second is uniqueness post-states. It cites the Paris Accords, which means our uniqueness warrants are more specific. Now let's go to the links. Extend that this and the veto is specifically key to legitimacy. It's able to increase the potential for them to be seen as effective. Second is representation specifically are key because they are able to be allowed to be seen. Russia and China check back for neutrality, so multiple powers are represented. Now let's go to your link terms. The first is you restructure the UN, but that it makes it worse because the UN is no longer seen as effective when it doesn't represent multiple interests. Your next argument is it influences credibility, but framing uniqueness link through a lens of uniqueness. If threat is sufficiently high now, then their only risk is one of the only potential for link is that's because your uniqueness is fine now. Your next you also make the argument there's no risk of collapse, but all the other countries do not matter. It's a question of whether great powers are willing to back the UN in a world where it's not seen as neutral, which is in the world of the affirmative. Then that is going to be able to make it worse. The Bosnian conflict, as we can see, you say there's no risk, but you have to see that UN peacekeepers have kept Bosnia specifically stable over the last year since conflict. That would draw in outside powers. You have also conceded that firebreaker and global conflicts were sufficient to solve the Israel advantage. Extend or go to number one, that the U.S. is inevitably tied to Israel, which means number two, which means it will not solve. Second, you can see the number one, that there is no specific solvency mechanisms. You're not able to resolve it. Third is that Israel is inevitably tied to this because they fear that the Palestinians and the conflict they would provoke if they're able to give greater territory, which means there is no unique offense. Fourth is that Israel would not back down to pressure. They've been pressured by the UN in the past, but doesn't result in any net change. Fifth is the U.S. would not change its stance. It would still give aid to Israel, which means that all the U.S. backing would still occur, which means the UN does not make a unique difference in the amount of conflict. Sixth is that there also would be no change in the amount of conflict, because the UN, because Israel would still be backed by the United States and other global actors. Also, you have considered the argument Japan and other global actors like India also back Israel inevitably, which means there's no unique difference in the amount of conflict, which means all your impact scenarios are terminally non-unique. We will go for the Israel backlash argument. You just assert they will not backlash, but in a world where their control is they see as essential as inevitably threatened, they will necessarily backlash against the plan. The impact is on first strike because they will first strike because they will have to go against Iran because it's seen as a necessary and sufficient threat against their ability to be sovereign. The B point is that this outweighs because it's inherent to their interests. They see Iran as necessary to their specific interests, which means it leads to conflict. This outweighs the case. The A point is that in a world of fast nuclearization, Iran would counterstrike. That causes Middle Eastern prolif and war. The B point is it also outweighs the scope because it would happen in a immediate time frame, which means it causes mass death. C point is that outweighs your impacts. Now the extinction outweighs. You say that you should evaluate your probability, but you don't get all poverty impacts. Well, we get an extinction impact that affects everyone, so it outweighs. The C point is also affects all conflict in general, so extinction definitely outweighs your impacts. The Russian advantage. One, you can see the rebels are inevitably going to force conflict, which means there's no risk of this scenario. Second, you can see that ISIS will inevitably be retreating and declining in scope. Well, so if ISIS was not going to result in it, there would be no conflict. Three, you say Trump would lead to war, but there is no net Trump conflict, so there's no net decrease in the likelihood of war. Fourth, crossed by the arguments on the hedge is that Russia will inevitably force conflict because imperialism is inevitable, which means there's no uniqueness for this. That fifth is it doesn't go nuclear. Iran, Syria does not have nuclear weapons, so you have not isolated a scenario where countries would be filled in. Sixth is Balkan war outweighs Russia. Would care a lot more about the Balkans because it's seen as a core piece of Serbian conflict, so it outweighs. Seventh is you have cited Merkel, but Merkel does not want to create conflict immediately after resuming power in a coalition, so Merkel would not go to war. Additionally, there is no way a veto would resolve. Russia has vested interest in the region like the naval base in Syria, so they would never be still involved, especially when they've committed so many resources, which means there's no risk of the Russia Act.
Is cross X before the L or F?
Yeah, it's before the
Oh.
UN legitimacy, you say it's high, why?
Three, a couple of warrants. One, only one of the last 15 vetoes has been used by the U.S. It's seen as a mechanism that can account for multiple interests, which resolves it. Two, our evidence from the Paris Accords indicates that there has been increased UN cooperation and cohesion, which means that UN legitimacy is sufficiently high. Three, we have indicated that veto powers are necessary for them to represent a variety of interests, which means that that is sufficient to safeguard UN legitimacy.
So, how is veto power able to resolve interests of regional actors better than just general assembly votes?
Sure. So our argument is that it means that, the other powers, because if there's a generally assembly vote, that can just be washed and seen as ineffective. Only in a world of veto, what?
Why?
Because, for example, the U.S. or other actors can ignore them. Only
so
our argument is that representation.
My question is this: if that is true, then why is Russia being chastised for vetoing an 85% vote in the General Assembly for the ceasefire?
Because even if they're chastised, that has no impact in terms of overall credibility if Russia can just ignore it. Our argument is that only a veto power specifically allows for multiple interests to be represented in a way that facilitates dialogue, which means that it's not so much a question of the number of people involved, but whether all the major powers are involved in a way that allows for UN legitimacy.
So the majority of people chastising the United Nations is saying that it's like not credible and only public in the United States cite their veto power. Is that being the case? Why would suddenly
That's simply not true, but. Yeah.
Why? Who is saying that the United Nations is not sufficient to like resolve conflict and everything and isn't citing the veto power, besides like peacekeepers?
I mean, our peacekeepers argument is a core impact for scenario, so I don't know why you're like accepting it.
No, I am saying besides people who say that the peacekeepers suck, who is criticizing the United Nations without citing veto power?
I think people support the veto power, which is our uniqueness, but.
My original question was, people are chastising the United Nations because of veto power. You said that's not true. I want to know who is chastising the United Nations and not citing veto power.
I mean, it hasn't happened yet because veto powers have been removed. Our argument is they would be chastised and attacked if they were to remove veto powers. Yes, it hasn't occurred yet because veto powers have not been removed. It seems like the premise of your question doesn't seem to make sense.
Okay. You say that. Why is there no Trump conflict?
Are you talking about the Russia advantage?
Yeah.
Because even if Trump says specific things, right, that doesn't mean he follows through, especially when there is like electoral incentives for him not to be involved in conflict, which means the Russia advantage is like empirically denied.
Then why did he just give like $2 billion worth of arms to the rebels?
Sure, so there's a distinction between giving arms and broader spillover in U.S. troop involvement. Also, if that has happened already, it seems like unlikely that the plan would resolve it, especially when we were locked in and have such significant influence in the region. Well, you want to stand?
It's going to be like an extended overview. The easiest thing to do is probably just take out a date sheet. Everyone ready?
Yeah.
Cool. Two parts to this speech. The first is layers and the second is preamps. On the layers of this debate, the first layer is that of the Bosnian impact scenario. They have not done nearly enough work here. We have already given sufficient evidence about how this is key spillover to all sorts of other global conflict, which means that there is substantial impact mitigation against the affirmative. You can evaluate the impacts through strength field link, even if there is an equal magnitude. You're always going to be favoring the negative because we have much higher probability because it simply goes uncontested. Additionally, we have given specific articulation about how the United Nations peacekeepers are specifically key to maintaining peace in Bosnia, that otherwise Russia would be able to intervene, triggering Article 5 or other NATO members being able to intervene, which will ultimately spill over into global conflict. The second layer of this debate comes on the double turn on advantage too. They say that hegemony is inevitable and that it would also lead to and that sort of conflict that they say hegemony is inevitable and also that this sort of conflict is inevitable, which means that they necessarily don't solve either of their advantages. Because if hegemony is inevitable, that means that the United States will always try to puppet Israel and will always sort of risk this sort of conflict with Russia, which means that definitely don't solve either of the advantages and give a negative on presumption. The third layer of this debate comes on affirmative solvency. They have not given specific articulation about how they're able to resolve either advantage. Specifically, on Israel backlash, we have just, on Israel, they have not specifically articulated what backlash will not happen. They say they preempted it. Yes, I understand. But our argument is that we are specifically answering the preempts that they made in the PMC and saying that they are incorrect. They specifically say that they make arguments on that US and the UN would be able to check back. However, we have been specific articulation about how if the Israel views themselves specifically isolated, then that's a unique reason about why they would be able to backlash in the status quo, because they specifically feel themselves cut off, because the United States does not have that sort of backlash. So your own warrants actually turn the entire advantage. So in a world of Iran, in a world where they first strike Iran, that's always going to lead to more regional conflict, which means that their impacts can actually be weighed on the negative because the world of the status quo means that you do not trigger them. So, additionally, they have conceded arguments about how this Russia impact scenario is not going to ever happen. They have conceded the fact that specifically Merkel and the United States have a very low probability of intervening in the status quo. They say that Trump has said he wants to do this. However, Trump has been able to win on a platform of non-interventionism and saying that he would not be able to do this, which means that it's empirically denied. Additionally, even if he did say that, the fact that that doesn't necessarily lead to specific policy mechanisms. Additionally, we have already won articulation about how Merkel has already won the election recently, which means that she does not have to worry about this in the future, which means that she's probably far less inclined to be able to have those sort of incentives to invade in the status quo, which means that they simply don't have any impact scenario on the second advantage, which means that they definitely don't solve. The fourth layer of this debate comes on the uniqueness debate, specifically of the affirmative. They're conceding that the status quo solves both advantages, specifically because Merkel does not want to go to war, and if our UN legitimacy arguments are correct in how that's solving conflict, that means we necessarily win the uniqueness debate, all the advantages as well as the disadvantages. So, preempts. So arguments they might try to go for. First is that they might try to argue that restructuring of the United Nations is specifically key to credibility. However, they have conceded the link analysis that we are making in the LOC and extended throughout the next block, which is specifically that the credibility is already high in the status quo because of the mechanisms that are in place that allow for things like the Paris Climate Agreement to pass and allow for other mechanisms in the status quo. If their arguments were true, then that would mean that conflict would have been increasing in the past 70 years since the United Nations with veto power, but that has already been empirically denied, which means that the status quo is definitely sufficient to solve the current and that the current mechanisms in place are already not only sufficient but necessary. Second, they might go for impact defense about how there's no collapse of the United Nations. However, this is not interactive with any of our arguments. We're specifically arguing that credibility is key to peacekeeping operations in Bosnia, which has the internal link to spill over into global conflict, which is that we definitely resolve this question. There's really no out for the affirmative here. They're going to probably try to argue that they necessarily increase UN legitimacy because vetoes are seen as unpopular. However, that is this is largely new analysis. In addition, they have also conceded the fact that the specific mechanisms that a fundamental restructuring of the UN would actually be bad in the status quo because it means that the countries are not able to perceive themselves as having sufficient voice in the status quo, i.e. the largest countries in the world, the P5, would not be able to be as legitimate, and since they have the largest influence, that they are always the greatest link.
We have 234 starting.
Okay, it's add 2, add 1, and then you'll need the hedge disadd because you'll need the imperialism parts, and then the UN collapse.
Add 2, add 1, the hedge disadd, and then
The UN disadd, yeah. And you just need the like imperialism parts on the disadd list. Is anyone not ready? The uniqueness of add 2 indicates that Russia veto is ensuring Syrian instabilities happening now. That means you can see the one that Middle Eastern instability is happening, global status quo, and it's essentially something acceptable. That means that it becomes try or die for the world to be affirmed. The collapsing counterplay means you don't resolve the conditions to make this essentially happen. Our second uniqueness points indicates that Russia is essentially increasing support for Assad now, which means it is literally try or die for the world of the condition to be affirmed. But the link level now, you have conceded a couple of arguments. The first is that the plan would absolutely be able to solve because the laws for restructuring the way to ceasefire is able to use it to ceasefire. Using the ceasefire would not be able to happen. However, you can see the couple of arguments from the NG. The first off is that you agree. You can see that the rebels have literally already agreed that this is specifically true on compensation of the way the instability is pressed on their nation, which means that you prefer to specifically more warrants based on geopolitics over their generic analysis about the way the Middle East is able to articulate. The second is that and all of your analysis is predictive is not predictive enough. Is not predictive the world post the status quo. It's just predictive the world of the status quo, which indicates that the affirmative will be able to resolve any conditions for why ceasefire would not be able to have. The second is you've also conceded our second solvency argument that indicates that Russia would absolutely have a decreasing of influence, which means they'd be pressured to be able to have that. That means that ceasefire is able to solve impacts. We're going for the Merkel goes in impacting. You can see the couple of arguments that indicates that this doesn't necessarily be able to true. The first warrant from the AMG is that Merkel would be able to go in because of the current conditions on geopolitics. You can see that the Germany and Syria necessarily are highest tension now because of the way that things like economic politics have been able to saturate them. Your only answer that you go for in the block is that Merkel won't go in because she has political incentives to be able to do that. However, that's not prescriptive. One, the fact that Germany and the Middle East are literally codified as being anti against each other, which is the description of our analysis now. But secondly, that their condition between Germany and the Middle East, Germany and Syria has massively changed even recently, which indicates that even if there is a small risk of the fact that Germany would be able to go in, you vote affirmative in today's debate because there's not a counterplay to be able to resolve those conditions, which means that we win the uniqueness debate, which indicates that instability in the Middle East is necessarily something that is inevitable now. You will add one. Yeah. We're not going for advantage one. The only offense that you have here is that Israel backlash will happen. Israel absolutely not backlash. You can see the one that the United Nations indicates that they have sovereign reason why they wouldn't do that. But secondly, you've also conceded our impact defense that indicates that even if Israel did backlash, they wouldn't be able to result in anything because they would have massive financial interest not to. Go to the first Assad. You say you extend across our imperialism argument. However, you conceded the first off that Cody's argument is that imperialism in the United States is necessarily something that's inevitable, which means that there is not a warrant that you can highlight to why imperialism is inevitable, which is a prerequisite to understanding the conditions that the block tries to go to. The second is that this also does not dump our advantage like you say that it does. Even if imperialism is necessarily something that's inevitable in the United States, it is not prescriptive of the way that conditions of geopolitics in the Middle East and Syrian instability are able to happen, which means that they become try or die to be able to resolve those conditions of the affirmative. Is that? Starting with uniqueness. The first argument is that you've mishandled our uniqueness arguments. Our arguments are not generic non-uniques, but rather are indicative of the fact that all of our non-uniques prove that it absolutely dumps the link to your disavowal. The first argument is that you concede that U.S. legitimacy is necessarily high now because of the way that conditions of deliberation to be able to have that means that uniqueness level that disavowal indicates you would not be able to resolve any of these conditions. Also, you conceded the warrant that indicates that the United Kingdom, France, and China will be able to balance and check back in anyways, which is the reason why you do not resolve the conditions of uniqueness. Link level. We're going for the link term that indicates that we allow for the reshaping of the United Nations is able to function. Your only argument underneath here is that the United States is only able to be effective because of their perceived effect with the United States. However, you've conceded one, that in the world post the affirmative, we changed those conditions, which means that we would allow for reshaping to happen. However, and second, that you've also conceded the solvency number 4 argument on the advantage 2, which indicates that we allow for reshaping and restructuring with the United Nations is able to function. That is important. At the end of the debate, you have a 100% risk of advantage to impact that there is not a counterplan that solves. You have a risk of the link versus the risk of the link turn. You use the level of analysis that the block tries to collapse to, which is about strings of links. Argument is that we want a sufficient enough argument that says that uniqueness is dumped and that the app would be able to link turn the disad. You vote app because of this try or die. The disad does nothing to turn the affirmative, nor does it mean that you're not able to resolve that. Impact level, the only argument we need here is that you've conceded our impact defense. It says that the ad would be able to resolve Bosnia because it allows for UN reshaping to happen, but it also means that other conditions are able to be restructured and refocused on, which means that it's try or die for the affirmative.